Good morning. I didn't used to need glasses to see a sermon. What a wonderful welcome from a wonderful brother in the spiritual journey, Rev Kev. My wife and I actually met while she was at divinity school at Harvard, and I was in rabbinical school nearby. And I was, this was 2007, 2008, and I was working on the Barack Obama primary campaign, recruiting clergy to come on board with the campaign and putting together an advisory board of clergy for then Senator Obama. And I went to the church where my future wife was the student pastor, unbeknownst to me. And she came out. I went in on a Sunday morning, listened to the sermon. The pastor that I was looking for wasn't there that day. He was on vacation. Elizabeth was preaching. She came out afterwards into the foyer, and the narthex, I later learned it was called, and invited me to the coffee hour. And once she found out that I wasn't going to be recruited for her church because I was Jewish, she thought, well, maybe I can recruit him for my own life. And the rest, as they say, is history. One of the first times that I went into a prison was here in California, a women's prison in the Central Valley near Fresno, some 20 years ago. And I was going in to teach meditation and conflict resolution and life direction, spirituality and social service, and helping people find a direction for their lives. And one of the women that I met outside the classroom where I was going in to work with, about 40, 50 women of all ages, all races, all experiences, all backgrounds. She was outside having a cigarette and waiting for the workshop to begin. So I started just engaging with her and talking with her. And she said two things that were very profound. The first thing she said was, the more time you have in here, the less time you have to waste. She said, I'm doing life, so I've got no time to waste. How are you doing life? The second thing she said was, in here, you can become either an animal or a saint. It's going to push you. It's going to push you one way or the other, but really the choice is yours which way you go. So my talk this morning is about which way we're going to go with the time we have, the short time we have on this earth, and about how we cultivate our hearts and minds to move in the direction of the saint and not the animal. Because whatever one thinks about, this becomes the inclination of the mind. As the Buddha said, the mind is the forerunner of all things. So if we're spending our time thinking about old grudges and hurts and traumas and resentments and things that we missed and things that we want, then our heart and our life is going to be filled with longing, desperation, clinging, suffering. If we fill our lives with appreciation and gratitude, compassion and loving kindness, our life will be filled with abundance, with goodness. When I talk about loving kindness, I'm not talking about FM radio love. I'm not talking about something that you feel when you get the spark, when you see somebody and it's all tingly and all that. I'm talking about an unconditional love, like you read about your mission statement and your vision. And it's unconditional in the literal sense, meaning I love you not because you love me. Not I love you as long as you don't change. I love you because you accept me and you promise not to talk about those things that nobody else is supposed to know. I love you because you're part of my family. I love you because. Loving kindness is about making space for something other than me, my, and mine. And how much of our thoughts are really about me, my, and mine? Not so long ago, I was in Marin, California, giving a talk, and I saw a bumper sticker that was very appropriate. It said, "I may not be much, but I'm all I think about." Loving kindness is about thinking about more than just ourselves. There's a story, a true story, about the Dalai Lama when he was in the Midwest doing a workshop, doing a conference, and at the end of the conference he was being escorted by his entourage from the hotel room out to go into the car to get to the airport so they could fly him back home to Dharamsala, India. And he stopped in the lobby. He says, no, we need to stop here for a minute. Can I speak to the manager? They thought, uh-oh, something must be wrong. And they brought the manager out, and he said, "Sir, thank you so much for all your service. Now, can you bring all your staff out?" And they brought out the entire staff, from the people that wash the sheets and towels, to the people in the kitchen, to the people cleaning the rooms, to the bellhops. And the Dalai Lama shook every one of their hands and looked them right in the eyes and said, "Thank you. Thank you. Thank you." And having spent a little time with him myself, I know firsthand that when you're in front of him, you are the most important thing in the world to him. That is a blessing. That is a gift. That is true loving kindness. The Buddha writes about loving kindness and describing it as the mother calf, the mother cow, and how she cares for the calf. Or the human mother caring for a newborn baby. Now, it's not necessarily the parent that we had and the parenting that we had. But if we think about the archetypal parent and we think about what it is we long for ourselves, that's what we give to each other. The archetypal love of a mother or a father for a newborn, looking into their eyes. And again, that may not be what you experienced. There's a wonderful, fairly recent collection of love poems for people with children by John Kenny. I want to read you one of his poems. It's called, "I'm Fully Aware That the Wheels on the Bus Go Round and Round." I get it. I know about the wheels and the horn and the babies. Everyone knows that. Here's something you might not know. The daddy on this bus is thinking, this is not what I signed up for. And maybe the driver on the bus is thinking the exact same thing. Maybe he looks over at the daddy and he doesn't go move on back. Maybe instead he nods and smiles. And the daddy nods and smiles, and the driver hits the gas and goes zoom, 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 so fast that the mommies on the bus say, "Jesus almighty, slow down." And the driver screeches to a halt at the corner because he sees a sign for a bar called "Open at 9 a.m., and he and the daddy get off the bus and go in. Call an Uber because this bus is out of service. Sing that verse, why don't you? Which is to say, relationships are hard. Love relationships, parenting relationships, family relationships, church relationships. Being human and relating to another human being is a challenge. And who's the hardest one to relate to? Myself. As my teacher and colleague and friend Jack Cornfield puts it, for many of us here in the West, half the spiritual path is learning simply to love yourself. Some 25 years ago, when I was a monk in Burma for a short period of time doing intensive meditation practice, I was having a hard time, and the abbot came out and he said, "You see those caves around the monastery up in the mountains? There are monks and nuns up in those caves, And all they're doing is loving kindness practice. They're sending out loving kindness, and he put his finger right in my chest, to you. And more importantly, you deserve it. So don't squander the great gift of all the love that's out there in the world. When I came back from Asia, I went on to a meditation center in Western Massachusetts and did a long retreat there. And I continue to struggle with self-doubt and self-recrimination. I went in for an interview with Sharon Salzberg, one of the center's guiding teachers. In the little room above the meditation hall, she was waiting, resting a cup of tea on the armrest of her chair. She sat and smiled, not just with her lips, but her entire being. And she said, "How's it going?" I knew she'd asked that question 1,000 times to 1,000 different people, but somehow I really felt like she meant it. You see, 12 times that day I had practiced my report for my teacher in the silence as I sat and walked. I tried to make it sound impeccable yet humble, try to include the right progress, the spontaneity, the humor. But sitting there in the beam of her loving kindness, I was at a complete loss for words. I had entered the room looking for acceptance and acknowledgement, or if nothing else, at least somebody that would affirm that I was worthless. And yet here she was offering the love that I sought, not because I was funny, or I had good practice, or I had done my meditation well, or good looking, or kind, or mindfully slow when I sat down. She merely gave it to me because I was the person sitting in front of her. And I had never felt so recognized. In the Hebrew Torah, in the book of Leviticus, it says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." Or a more accurate translation, "Love your neighbor, for they are none other than you." Love your neighbor, for they are none other than you. The immigrant, the stranger, whomever it may be, however they may look, they are one and the same as you because we are all created in God's image. We are all part of one great being. Or as the great Irish poet W.B. Auden put it, "Love your crooked neighbor with all your crooked heart." Some of us, of course, are more naturally inclined to love. But as they say, the heart is a muscle. It needs to be exercised, and we can cultivate it. That's what our workshop this afternoon is going to be about, cultivating love in our hearts and minds. This is also the work of the Exodus Project, with mentoring, with housing, with employment for people coming out of prison and jail. And just to add a little plug before I tell one or two more stories before I end, Exodus is always looking for new mentors. We match women with women and men with men to work one-on-one with people coming out of jail and prison, to drive them to the DMV, to sit with them and have a cup of coffee and hear their plans and help them line their plans up and help them turn it into a reality. The intersection of poverty, mental illness, addiction, racism, so many factors that go into incarceration. And so much of the chance of not recidivating, of not going back, depends on having somebody there waiting for you. So I want you to look under your seats, and if you don't have a little red sticker on the floor under your seat, that means you've been selected to be one of the next Exodus Project mentors. We do an extensive training, and then it's a commitment of about 8 hours a month. You can talk to me afterwards if you're interested. What I found when I was working inside the prison with the women, and before that in the juvenile halls in New York City, was that they didn't care what I had learned. They didn't care if I knew how to meditate. They didn't care if I had a curriculum or a plan. They cared if I cared about them. The kids in juvie would sometimes take my meditation bowl and throw it once it even broke. They'd want to see if I'd come back the next week anyway. Would I laugh at their jokes? And really they wanted to know, could I hold my own pain? And could I hold theirs? Because for so many of these young people, they don't have anybody they can actually share it with who could hold their pain. One young woman, about 16 years old, said, if I let it out, my anger and pain, it would burn up everyone I loved. Nuh-uh, sister, said the woman next to her, the girl next to her. Mine would destroy the universe. About 10 years ago, my great-aunt Harriet passed away. She was 100 years old, and before her passing, she was the wisest, most beautiful woman I'd ever met. When I was about 2, she had a stroke. She fully recovered, except half of her face fell, so that when you looked at her, one half of her face was always smiling and her eye was sparkling at the joy in the world, while the other half was frowning, and there was always tears dripping out of her eyes as if she was crying at the suffering in the world. She and I always had a close relationship since I was a child. She loved chocolate, and so did I. She loved me, and so did I. But when I moved out to California in my 20s, it had been a while since I had gotten back east, and I hadn't seen her in a while. And I went back for a conference for work and went to a family wedding. And I showed up at the wedding in some big hotel ballroom. I missed the actual ceremony, but came to the reception. And I walked in, and I was sort of nervous. I didn't really know too many people that were going to be there, and I didn't recognize anybody. And I thought maybe I was in the wrong ballroom. And then I spotted my great-aunt Harriet sitting in a chair next to her walker. I immediately felt like I was in the right place. So I went right over to her. She was sitting down having lunch, and I knelt down next to her, and I took her hand in mine, and I said quite loudly, because she had 2 hearing aids at least by that point, I said, Harriet, it's so good to see you. And her face just lit up. She stroked my hand. She said, oh dear, you look wonderful. It's so good to see you. What did you think of the wedding? It was beautiful, wasn't it? Oh, you look wonderful. And she stroked my cheek. She said, I'm so glad you're here. You made my day. And we talked for a while, and then I said, let me get some lunch, and I'll come and sit down next to you. She said, oh, that would be wonderful. And I start to stand up, and I just felt so loved. And as I stood up, she squeezed my hand and said, just the one thing, honey. Who are you? And I said, I'm Seth, your great nephew, Paul's son. Oh, yes. It's so good to see you. And as I went through the lunch line, I was a bit disconcerted, both by the fact that maybe she was starting to lose her mental faculties, but also the fact that it wasn't me that she was really loving. It was just whoever was right in front of her. By the time I got to the end of the lunch line, 3 other people hadn't recognized me either from my side of the family, and I realized that I just looked different, and she was really okay. And I also realized what a remarkable gift to make someone feel so loved, so seen. If only we could meet each person that way. And maybe we can. May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy and safe. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings be free. Thank you.